Welcome. You are listening to the Be a Better Being podcast, hosted by Michelle Zellner and Sasha Berscheid. Michelle and Sasha are here to give you information and inspiration to help you live your healthiest, happiest lives. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the show.
Greetings. Thank you for tuning into the Be a Better Being podcast. I'm Michelle Zellner, your host, joined today by an incredibly amazing young lady, Alyssa Coelho. Thank you for joining the show, Alyssa.
Thank you so much for having me, Michelle. I'm excited to be here.
Well, I'm excited to have you here because you have such a fascinating background and story, and I think it's a perfect time of year for someone like you to come on and share all that you have to offer, because for a lot of people, it's a great time of year, but it's mixed in with some stuff that's not so great as well. And I mean, that's just kind of a metaphor for life. But to have something that's uplifting and inspiring, I think is a really nice message that I want to put out in this month. And like I said, looking at your background, I thought you were just the perfect person to have on the Be a Better Being podcast. So let's just dive into it. Give the audience the background, the backstory, and then we'll just take it up until present time.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you so much. I mean, the holidays are definitely, it's a tough time for everyone. I have a book coming out on the winter solstice, right? So right before December, right before Christmas. And it's all about it's the first of a fiction series, and it's based heavily on my own experience, but with a whole lot of fantasy and magic added. And I'm just realizing as we get into the holidays, and I'm hearing feedback of readers who are sort of getting the book beforehand, how helpful it is, because it's all about the journey of grief. And I lost my dad in 2017, so almost 6 or 7 years now. And it was right around the holidays too. And so this time, and the holidays for me have never quite been the same since. We're all older, and we've all been disjointed since, and trying to kind of reorient around how do we experience magic? How do we recreate that? And fortunately, we got a new baby in the family. So it kind of reawakens all the excitement to kind of recreate the holidays again for him.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. I had my friend Michelle Collins, who I know you are acquainted with as well. She came on a few months ago to talk about grief and the grief process. And I think it is something that obviously it's a natural part of life, but we're not taught how to do it. And then we throw in something like the holidays. And then if the person you lost happens to have passed around the holidays, right? It just kind of adds on to all of the regular things that somebody might go through when they grieve the loss of somebody. And to your point, I mean, 6 years, it doesn't matter if it was 6 days ago or 6 years ago, right? That loss is still there. And finding out what that new normal is going to look like, feel like, there is no blueprint, there is no right or wrong answer. But I think what we tend to do is just not talk about it.
Right.
Because it's hard. And so we don't like to talk about hard things, especially at the holidays. We're all supposed to be happy and joyful and grateful. And that can be hard to be when you're feeling this loss, but also you don't want to be the person who brings up this really heavy, hard conversation and bring all the joy down, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely.
let's just talk about the grief process in general, and then I definitely want to hear like how to bring that magic back. I think that's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. It's never quite easy. It's not something we're given a blueprint for how to deal with grief. And so I didn't actually experience it. Fortunately, I did not lose anyone in my life until I was 21, which is great, but I was quite sheltered. And then when I was 21, it was my father, and it was the person I was closest to, and my whole world spiraled, and I was going through a really insane sort of spiritual crisis at the time too. So I had zero coping mechanisms for how to get through it. And I spent a few months just locked up in my room, just going through all the things, raging and denying, and, all the stages of grief. So I was fortunate enough that my oldest sister, who has also worked with Michelle, she sort of coached her through her book writing process. So she gave me Dan Millman's book. Are you familiar with his work at all?
I'm not.
Oh, he wrote the Way of the Peaceful Warrior, and it was a saga. And it was Nothing too crazy, because I couldn't at the time, because of where I was at spiritually, I couldn't really lock on to any super profound spiritual principles or things being taught at me. But he had this really magical way of sharing his experience and sort of planting these little seeds of curiosity. And it reached me. It was like just enough woo so I could jump on the train, but not enough to chase me away. So she sent me his book, and 3 days later, I had the rest of them ordered and on my doorstep. And I bought a ticket to his retreat in Costa Rica, and so I went there for a week. And afterwards, I came home and I told my sister I could write a whole freaking book on that week. That was crazy. And she's the wrong person to say that to, right? So then I had this whole idea for a book sort of come through, and then it evolved into a series. And it wasn't that I was thinking about this while you were talking. I found a quote the other day that was talking about how healing is a practice and it's not a destination. And it's so true in regards to what you're saying around, it can hit you at any time. 3 years down the line, 6 years down the line. I have a friend who lost her dad 15 years ago. And she was like, I was just in my closet the other day and I got a whiff of it and I just broke down. And so I feel like it's this, especially when we live in this culture of self-development, it's like we expect that the time is going to come where we're healed and we can handle it all. But the reality is, grief just doesn't function like that. It gets stuck in our bodies at times, and I feel like it's all about moving it through. And so when I was about 3 months there after into my grieving, I couldn't move it through. Like I was just stuck and looking for the right next step, because it spiraled me in ways around, like, I couldn't function with anything. I had just launched a book. I had just started my own business, and I was just looking at everything I was doing in my life and trying to find the meaning. Like, how does any of this matter when I just lost the most important person around me? And so there was this huge conversation around time too. On the back cover, I wrote, one of the main quotes from the book is, I wept as time stopped and I wept as time refused to cease, because I feel like you get caught in this bubble around, like, oh, everything has just stopped, but you see the world moving around you and you're like, how? So that was kind of the birthplace of finding solace in traveling and finding the magic for me in traveling. And that was pivotal in the grief experience for me, was taking myself out of the ordinary, like out of this place of watching the world move around me and not knowing what to do, and putting myself outside. And because you have to function when you go to a different country, especially if you don't learn the language, like, it forces you to figure things out and to function and to stay present and to sort of get out of the past and the future and all of the anxieties that encircle those things. So that was where I really started to see magic pop up again. And it was that week in the jungle in Costa Rica when all of these sort of synchronistic experiences started happening, that not it wasn't that it was just this giant healing moment. It was a series of tiny experiences that left me leaving Costa Rica feeling more whole. And I feel like that's kind of what we're all chasing, right? Is like the pieces of ourselves that make us feel more whole, whether they're broken or whether they're far away. That's kind of the journey.
Well, I love how you phrase that, because I think when we think about healing, we kind of do just wait for that end result when everything is better. But healing is a process. I mean, if I get a cut, it's not magically better the next day. The healing starts the minute I cut myself. It starts healing. I can't even see the result of that. Eventually, I see the full result of that wound fully being healed. But I think when it comes to grief and emotional healing, we tend to assume that, like you said, at one point, it's just going to be better.
Yeah, I've heard people say, like, oh, well, when you can talk about it without the emotion or without getting consumed by the emotion, that means you're healed. Well, I don't super agree with that. And again, and then it brings up the conversation around, like, healing being this destination. And I don't foresee any day in the long-term future when I don't think about my dad and my heart aches. And it can ache in a good way, it can ache in a bad way, but he's such an intrinsic part of who I am. That's always going to be there, you know? So it's sort of this interesting journey around looking for how to find the magic in life again, to reawaken those, parts of yourself that get lost when you grieve, because there's grieving the loss of the person, and then there's all the other parts of grief that no one ever talks about, like who that person was to you and in your life, and to who you were and what they taught you. And I was his caretaker for the last few years of his life, so that was a whole different type of identity. I was a straight A student in college trying to figure out how any of the letter grades even mattered, because I felt no meaning in what I was doing anymore. So there's all these other parts of your identity that kind of crumble. And so that's another huge, theme throughout the book. Is it's a journey of healing through the grief, and also healing emotionally and spiritually and physically too, while you're going through that.
And that's what makes it also complicated and also such a unique journey, because everybody has a different type of relationship with the people that they care about, the people that they lose, right? They have different degrees of interaction and degrees of connection with these people, which is why there is no blueprint for any of it. There's no rule book, there's no guidebook. But I think what the important part is that you are open to going through the process. And very often, I think that is where we lack, right? We don't want to be open to the process because the process is painful.
Yeah.
And nobody likes pain generally, but perhaps it's about reframing the perspective, right? You said a crumbling of identity, and immediately I thought, actually, it's just discovering the identity that you had, and how do you take those pieces to build yourself up bigger, stronger, different, more whole, right? Because you still have your identity, that will never be taken away. You will never not have been your father's caretaker. And you think of all the experiences that you had and the things that you shared with him because of that very unique situation, and how that then is going to build and shape and mold you going forward for other things. So I think so much of it, like almost anything in life, it's about how we choose to see things, right? What the perspective is. I do have a question. So
Mhm.
you decided to travel, and maybe it was just because of this retreat, but is traveling something that you and your father had done? Was that kind of a connecting bond, or is that something he wanted to do and never really did? Why I'm going to go to a foreign country? Why that, right? We could go to retreats anywhere. Why that?
Yeah, that's a great question. My family was wondering it too. I'm the baby of 4 kids, and everyone saw me spiraling out in grief and was like, "You just bought a ticket to where at, this time, like of all things?" And no, traveling was not something that I grew up doing. It was not something that my parents were big fans of. They had 4 kids and they spent their years building a home, and it wasn't an idea when I was a kid, but it was more so following the steps as they appeared beneath my feet. That's also another one of the quotes by Dan Millman. I'll read it because it's such a good one. And I put it at the very front, and so you get the real feel that it's part of the journey. He said, "There is a mystery that many call God, manifesting as universal love, a set of laws and a great process. That process works through each and all of us, and that process is perfect. As we discover this fundamental truth in the journey of our lives, we find that wherever we step, the path appears beneath our feet." So there's this really beautiful kind of torturous metaphor that goes on through the book that follows Scarlett as she's battling with nature, right? Because she just threw herself into the jungle of Costa Rica. And so while she's dealing with all these different parts of herself, she's sort of wrestling with the jungle here and there. And then by the end of the book, everything starts to part for her. Everything starts to make way. The paths start to appear, and it's easier for her to see. Whereas at the beginning, the invitation was dropped or the trees parted and she just didn't notice and she didn't see it. So bringing that back to the grief journey, I feel like that was a huge part for me. I had no idea what I was going to Costa Rica for. It wasn't until I got there I realized that there were real Dan Millman fanatics here. Like people were paying big money to, come see him and meet him. And I was like, oh, I didn't even think about all that. But I just knew that this was the right next step. I had no idea what would be in store for me there. And no, I'm going on 28 now, and I'm going through my own things. I'm watching my sister go through her own things. And I think the central reminder that keeps us from spiraling sometimes is just looking for the right next step in anything you do in life. It's really easy to get lost in the 5-year plan and the 10-year plan. And, well, how is this choice going to turn into this later on? And all the things. And sometimes you just got to go for the next right step.
Yeah, and again, it's about that openness and willingness, right? To step into something that's uncomfortable, something that's new and foreign, and a lot of times it's the fear of all those things that holds us back, or it's irrational, right? How could you be going to Costa Rica when you just lost your dad and spending this money, and like everybody's going to have an opinion about something, and yet sometimes it's those seemingly irrational things that we do that end up being the magic that gets us to where we need to go next. When now, I mean, 28, my gosh, to be 28, I love it. I am a unicorn. I have still not, at almost 51, well, I'll be 51 by the time this airs, I have not lost anybody close to me.
Oh,
I know
that's beautiful.
my cat was the first one this past May, and I think because I've gone so long and I've done a lot of work on myself, and I've worked with people who have lost people and made sure that I am intentional with connections about people. And I understand that we're going to lose things, people, pets, stuff. I think I did okay going through the grief process. I won't be tested until I actually lose a human that matters to me. And then I'll know, right? If I've learned a lot of lessons along the way and developed the skills and tools that probably at 25, how could you have developed them, right?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so it is that process and that journey and all the things that we learn as we go, but you have to have the willingness. And so often we are trying to make sense of what happened when it shouldn't have happened, right? This isn't fair. I'm too young to have lost my father. He was such a good person. Why did he die so soon, right? We're going to have those stages of grief, which are all totally normal. And you have to go through them, because if you don't go through them, or you try to bypass them, or you try to fast forward through one of them, you're going to eventually revert, right?
Yeah.
And so while healing is a journey, you have to be an active participant in it, right? The old cliche, time heals all wounds. No, it doesn't. Doing hard work during that time is what's going to heal the wound. You have to be an active participant in your healing journey. And when you get stuck somewhere and you recognize that we're getting stuck, right? I've locked myself in my room. I haven't come out for a month, or I'm not doing things that generally bring me joy, or I don't have the motivation to go pursue a challenge or to, interact with certain people. Okay, those are clear signs that you are stuck.
Right.
The only person who can unstick you is you and your network. And that's why having that support network is so important, and being able to talk through these things is so important. So what role did the other family members play in all of this, and how did everyone else kind of process through this loss alongside with you?
Yeah, well, I think you nailed it on the head there when you talked about perspective, right? Because everyone's got different perspectives when something like this happens. And I mentioned there was a sort of spiritual unraveling involved in the beginning. And I had grown up in a Christian home. It wasn't super culty or dogmatic. It was very fostering of the love, the light, the message. I dove into Christianity when I was 16 and started exploring it for myself, got really attached, and then 18 got to college and spent about 3 years with all of the questions. And so when my dad passed, that's when all the voices came in of, well, he's with the angels now and Jesus wanted him early. And so that's when you start to hear all the perspectives and sort of the cliches that you're talking about. And they're just age old things that people have found comfort in. And it wasn't doing it for me. If anything, it was just enraging me. And the person who, during the period, I had been able to connect with, because I watched the different members of my family sort of start trying to sort these things out for themselves. And the person who really spoke to me was my brother. And there was this scene I included it in the book because it was just super crucial to the healing experience for me, because I was wrestling with all these different perspectives, trying to find comfort. And so there's a scene where Scar's sitting in the bed with her brother. She's sort of sitting on her dad's side of the bed, where his body was molded into the bed because he was there sick for so long. And she's sitting there, and he's trying to comfort her. And he had already experienced the walking away from the church and exploring science and finding his solace there. And so they're sort of sitting there trying to figure this out together, and she's like trying to find some comfort in what's happening on the other side of this reality, whatever that looks like. And she asks him, what do you think happens to souls after they leave? Do they just poof and that's it and everything's black? And or do you think that there's more? And his answer really brought me back to the moment, and it was this: I have no idea. Like, no one has any answers. So, there's tons of theories, but what I know is that he lives on in us. That his blood, his DNA is literally inside of us. And when you look in the mirror and you see his nose, or you see his eyes, or when you give to someone, or when you go buy someone lunch the way he would do, like, he lives on in those things in you. And you could say this to someone else who's grieving, and it wouldn't be the thing they needed to hear. It wouldn't be the thing that pushed them forward. But for me in that moment, it was, oh, okay. So if I live on, he lives on, right? And so I'm facing this grief that's like threatening my survival, because I can't really function in the world. And that gave me motivation. Like, if I keep living my life and I keep honoring the person that he was to me, then I can keep experiencing that. And so it's almost like you got to find the certain things that help you to keep the magic alive, and recreate it in the world.
Well, I want to circle back to how you said, to find the comfort, because that is what we as humans, right? We want things to make sense. We want to know because we don't like to feel discomfort.
Yeah.
And so if we feel like we have an answer, then everything's fine. No matter how accurate, logical, whatever the answer might be, if we believe it, that's all that matters.
Mm-hmm.
And, yeah, everybody's going to have an opinion about something. And, I think as we are all working and eventually everybody will grieve something or someone, just keep in mind that maybe there is a time and place for certain things to be said to people. Maybe I don't have to say anything to you because there is nothing I could say that's going to make your pain go away,
Mm-hmm.
ever. But I can just say, you know what? I can only imagine how painful this is, and I'm here for you. Right? I don't have to say, oh, he's with the angels.
Yeah.
That might be my belief, but is my belief onto you what's going to help you? Because ultimately, in this phase of when you're with somebody who's lost something, ultimately it should be about supporting that person through their process. And I think it's totally fine to not have an answer for them because you don't know that that's fact either. It might be your belief, but maybe it isn't going to resonate with them. So, as we have more open conversations about this hard topic, just from the other side of it, keep that in mind, is you don't always have to say something. And I think that's where the discomfort lies also, because we feel like we should say something to make you feel better, or, to help you through this. Maybe I can just say, I have nothing to say. I don't even know what I could say. And so I'm just going to be here with you.
Yeah. And I've found that people had such great intentions. Like, the people around me who said all those things, they had such great intentions, but everything just ticked me off. Like, I'm generally not a person who's a fan of unsolicited opinions, especially when it comes to beliefs or spirituality. Like, if I have people in my life whose opinions I seek and I trust and I ask, but I don't like that just given to me. And I found that the most comfort to this day, when I'm grieving, when I'm hurting, when I'm going through anything, is someone to just be there with me. They don't even have to talk. Just someone who's showing up and shows you that. And I have this one friend who, she suffered a loss much, I don't want to say greater, because I don't think it's measured in comparison, but she suffered a pretty massive loss a couple years ago. And I had no idea how to support her. It was a loss of a child. And it was just, I looked for the places where I could show up and fill the holes, you know, without pushing too much. And I got the sweetest message from her the other day because she started reading the book and she had no idea that I had gone through a similar grief so many years before her. And she just thanked me so much for the ways I showed up and gave her support during. And that filled me so much because it was like I became, even just with this one person, I became the thing that I needed the most back then. And I think that's a lot of what we're trying to do when we, have conversations like this and we're trying to bring some good news and advice into the world for other people.
Absolutely. And I think to your point of comparison, there is no comparison. Everyone's grief is their grief. And, sometimes in an effort to relate, somebody will say, "Oh, I know what you're going through because and then they turn it into a story about themselves. And I love that you recognize that people are coming with good intentions, because I think that's always a good place to remind ourselves, even though it might be grating on me, I'm going to remember that they're coming at it from a good place. They just don't really know what to do. So I'm going to give them grace. But maybe also at some point, I'm going to have a voice and say, that really isn't helping me. That really isn't what I need. Here is how you can support me and help me through this. But again, unless we start having these conversations openly and be vulnerable and, be willing to be bold and say something that might offend somebody, we're never going to really understand how to support somebody who's going through this, right?
Yeah.
And not everyone's the same. So I might say one thing to you and it'll be like nails on a chalkboard, and I say that same thing to somebody else and it'll be exactly what they need to hear. That's also what adds to all the layers of complexity around this. So I think for everybody, both sides, just kindness and compassion, grace and gratitude. Let's just try to operate from those spaces, knowing that hopefully everybody really is coming from a good place of good intentions. And then we'll just work through to adjust and ebb and flow and be fluid with situations, hopefully to get to a place where, we feel good about being around the people that we want to be around.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's, I think, it's been the biggest practice for me because it's easy to say as a mindset shift, but it like you can understand just by this conversation how reactive my temperament was back then when I was grieving and these things would come at me. But over the years, when people do give unsolicited opinions or advice and things like that, I've learned to try to do what you're saying, sort of remain open. And especially, this is kind of one of the really magical parts of throwing yourself into different cultures and different countries and learning their traditions and their myth stories and their origin stories and learning about how they see these different things, right? And I was accustomed to all the things I was hearing when I was here, but when I went there and I would listen to their beliefs and if you listen with an open mind and an open heart, and even if it doesn't resonate with you, I'm a big believer in it's the practice of doing that really just, it keeps us open. It keeps connection open with other people. It keeps connection open with source, with everything. I think it's very important.
And it might not be something that resonates with you at that moment. Perhaps down the line, there's going to be something that kind of ignites that spark again, and it does resonate with you, right? And again, that is all about the willingness to be open-minded, open-hearted, open the ears, right? All those things, which are really hard to do, especially when you're the one grieving, because grieving is a survival mode. Mm-hmm. And when we're in survival mode, this is all that matters. Right? I just got to get through. I don't want to hear anyone. I don't want to talk to anyone. I don't want to look at anyone. I want anyone to tell me what to do. Right? And that is all a completely normal human reaction to a threat. And when you have been caused pain because of loss of something, that's a threat to your soul. Mm-hmm. And so when we recognize that this is just a normal, it's not the nicest part of life, but it's a normal part of life, then how can we honor it, embrace it for what we had, mourn the loss of what we no longer have, but also look to what we have now because of what we had. So let's talk a little more about the magic and moving forward. And and how somebody can really continue living life of joy even after they've suffered some kind of loss.
Yeah, I definitely think it's all about trying to find that again. So I found that sort of in the trenches of my healing process because there were so many different dynamics. I had neglected my body as a caretaker. I just was so focused and adrenalized taking care of him for so long that by the end I didn't recognize myself in the mirror anymore. And I had forsaken a dance, which was a huge part of my vitality and who I was. And so it was sort of a practice of saying yes again, too. When in the book, there's a dance scene where there's this class, and she's like, I kind of remember that part of me, but well, let's open it up. Let's just see. And it became this really beautiful sort of thing because it opened up connection to ourselves. And I think even in the conversation of spirituality, that it's so important to, this is what I love about Dan Millman's work, is that he takes these really grand, beautiful spiritual principles and he makes them so practical and grounded, right? Because he's an Olympic gymnast who just, he had to be practical about all of his practices, but he was so intrigued by spirituality. And so I think that when we are trying to explore those big principles, it's a huge matter. It's a huge thing of importance to maintain the things that, like we were saying, keep us open, keep us happy, keep us processing. And so if our bodies aren't moving, our bodies are not going to be processing any of the emotions that are going through them. And so the practice of dance, even to this day, when I'm feeling a little more depressed or I'm going through something and I don't want to do anything, I have to move the energy. I can't stay stagnant, or I know you're just gonna be stuck. And so I'm always looking for the areas of where there could be a little light, even for myself. I love dance, but I also really love ice skating and I'm not very good at it. And I also really love painting and I'm not very good at it. So anytime I see something open up that could be a little invitation to one of those things, I always try to, because you never know where you're going to sink in, what is going to resonate with you in different seasons of your life. And where you're going to find that light again, or something that might just open you back up to experience.
I love it. It's getting used to saying yes. And so often it's saying yes over and over that gets people in trouble, right? It's not learning to say no. But in this case, it's saying yes to yourself. It's giving yourself permission to move forward, not move on, but move forward. And I don't know, because I haven't been through it personally, but I do know through conversation, and I can imagine, and I've seen it, where people do start to do things for themselves and others have a comment about that. How could you do this? I can't believe you're going to work. How could you go to that dance class? Don't you need to be at home and take care of yourself, right? They have these ideas that doing things that are allowing you to move forward, somehow that's the wrong way to go. You haven't given it the appropriate number of days or number of tears out of your eyes to be officially, through the grieving process to be at this point. So I don't know, did you experience any of that when you started showing up for you? Was there any outside commentary about that?
Oh yeah, I don't think that ever stops. That became evident when I decided to travel at first when I was grieving. And I know, like I said, most of the intentions were really good. People cared about me and didn't want me to put myself in any bad situations. But even to this day, travel for me it's a self-care practice. Like, it's something that I have built into my lifestyle as a necessity, because I get stuck in the rut. I get, just pounded with work, and I get sort of overtaken by the normalities of my life and the mundanity sometimes, and I need the magic. Like, I need to explore and get lost a little bit. And so that's become a self-care practice for me. And so I book a trip here, I book a trip there, and Normally it's to places where I don't really know the language, and so it's a little riskier. And I've heard all the things. I've been called a millennial, I've been called a runner, I've been called an adrenaline seeker. It's just everyone's always going to have their opinion about what you're doing, and I think it's just a matter of getting really clear about what we need. Our culture and our society always has a lot to say about what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. And I'm experiencing that as I'm watching my sister become a mom for her first time, and her dealing with all of the voices about how they did it and how that should be done and what's healthier and what's right. And I'm just like, yeah, but what's your gut saying? Because like you created this life, and I feel like deep down how to sustain it. And at the end of the day, I think that that's what it comes down to with our own bodies and our own souls, that when we get quiet with ourselves, we can figure out what we need. And shoot, everyone, I included, had opinions about how my mom was grieving, because she's been a nurse for 40 years, and she's gone through it all before. And so I remember seeing a few nights where she had a really hard time, but for the most part she hunkered down and got through it all. And I just admired her strength and her resolve, and but I couldn't understand it. And she really valued her alone time. And I was like, yeah, but what about a book club or a painting class or a wine and sip? Or I would suggest all these things. And she was just like, I know what I need. I need to be alone in the bath for like, a couple hours every night, and I'm good. And so we all fall into the having opinions about how other people should do things too. It's like you were saying, we live on both sides of it all. And I think at the end of the day that, what was your cat's name?
Axel.
Axel. So what were some practices for you that helped you grieve and heal, but then also start to kind of get excited about life again after experiencing that? Because that's difficult.
It is. She passed while I was away on an overnight trip. And the day before I left, I thought, I should probably take her to the vet. She's being a little funky. And then I got the call the next morning that my cat sitter, who was taking care of the two cats, found her laying by my bed with Bodhi, my other cat, sitting right next to her. And of course, I was devastated, right? There's the guilt, like I should have taken her, I should have known. I snapped out of that very, very quickly. And I know I did because I've had 50 years to learn about this. I really shifted my perspective immediately. Axel went out on her terms. She prevented me from making a really hard decision, because had I come home, I would have taken her to the vet, and then I would have had to make a hard decision. And she just didn't want to have me to do that. Super grateful that the person who was watching my cats loves cats and knows her and knew what to do to give her a little bit of dignity until I could get home. And versus somebody else who was, I'm just here to feed the cats a couple of days because you're only gone overnight, right? It could have been anything. Really grateful that Bodhi was there right by her side, as she has been their litter mates for 14 years, so she didn't die alone. And just the little things that happened all along the way in the last few months, just letting me know that she's still there taking care of me. This is kind of a long story, but I don't think I've told it on the podcast yet. So she passed in May when I was away on a trip. This is kind of a yucky part. I was super slam busy with work. I didn't have time to deal with her for a few days, so I had to put her in my freezer. And my dad happened to be with me on a visit, so I couldn't open the freezer. So like, Dad, reach in and get the strawberries out, right? So he would do that in those few days. And then we had the opportunity 2 days later to take her to get cremated. But, all I can ever vision in that freezer is my cat in it. So I go home in July, and while I'm gone, I get a call from my cat sitter who's staying with Bodhi and says, I think your refrigerator freezer is going out. I'm like, oh, okay. Just take all your stuff out. Don't worry about it. I'll deal with it when I get home. Well, yeah, let's just get a new one. Okay, great. So that's fine. I'm getting a new one. I don't think about really anything. I go away on a trip with my sister, and I said to her on that trip, I said, I really just hope nothing dies on this trip, because my last 2 trips, things have died. Well, I get back, and my cat sitter who found Axel had left me this beautiful orchid. She knows I love orchids. They're kind of a symbol in my house. And it was really beautiful. And I gave my other gal all the instructions on how to water it. It's been beautiful this whole time. I come home from that third trip and that orchid is dead, dead. There's no reason the orchid should be dead. None. It's dead. Not dying. I can bring it back. It is dead. And that's when it dawned on me. Oh, this is Axel. Had that refrigerator gone out while I was here, I would have called somebody in to get it fixed. Axel didn't want me to have to deal with that anymore. She let it go while I was gone. That orchid, while it's a beautiful gesture and symbol, it is a symbol of her death. And she just decided there doesn't need to be any more symbols of my death around. So I'm just going to let that orchid die while you're gone, because it'll never die while you're here. So I know those three things. I know those are her. And people can think I'm a total nut job. I don't care. I believe that those spirits work in ways. And so it's those little things that just make me laugh and make me like, yep, you got me. You're still taking care of me no matter what. And it's those things. And me and Bodhi, we figured out how to be a 2-critter household. And, you know, she's grieving too. So the two of us, we're figuring it out. But I always look at things. I had 14 amazing years with her. And that's the downside of having things you love. You're going to lose them. But I would rather have things and lose them than not have had those 14 years, right?
Right.
So yeah, that's a little insight into how my brain works. I will be very interested and curious to see how my brain works when it's a parent or a friend or, you know, someone else that I really care about and love, right? Because it's a little different level. I have a feeling I will look at things very, very much the same way, but we'll see.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just you saying that, I'll be interested to see how my brain works. Shows so much awareness, you know, and the ability to like step back and see how things are functioning and what parts of you are triggered and reacting or not. I think it's great what you said about how she's showing up in certain ways. I had that friend who was experiencing the grief of her child ask me, "Do you ever hear your dad's voice?" And I was like, yeah, I hear it every day. He yells at me in my head every day for leaving my straightening iron plugged in and for leaving the fridge open. Like, you know, I hear that every day, and it kind of like broke her out of the seriousness that we get when we talk about spirits or things like that. But those are ways that we keep those things alive, you know? And if it makes us a nut job sometimes, then so be it. My sister does some things sometimes, and I'm like, I can't wait for a golf ball to fall out of heaven and hit you in the head for that one. And I think it's all about continuing the magic and making it live on. I love what you said about her going out on her own terms and how it took you time to realize that too. There's a very real scene in the book, the night at the emergency room with my dad. And again, my mom had been a nurse for 40 years, and the doctor came out and said, there's electricity in his body, but we can't get a pulse, but we are continuing. The team is rotating and doing CPR on him. And my mom said, okay, you can stop. And I lost it. I was like, what do you mean? If there's still a chance, why in the world would you blah, blah, blah? But she knew what it meant. And so she said, okay, then, you know, it's your call. Like, you can make the call. And they invited us back there, and I saw the team of 7 people working on him, and I got to see for myself what was happening, and in the right timing I said okay. And there was, I don't want to say I carried a guilt around with that, because I didn't, but there was a weight and the responsibility that was given to me to tell people to stop trying to keep my dad alive, you know. And I remember in that moment, my mom combing through his hair and looking at him and thanking him for a beautiful life. And she had so much peace through her tears. And that's a difficult thing to explain, but this is one of the things I just admire so much about my mom, is her resolve in knowing when the time has come for certain things, you know. And she was always a voice growing up, keep looking forward, just you have to keep going. And so she had so much peace and so much resolve in that moment. And she knew because she knew him more than anyone. It was her mate of 40 years. She knew he wanted to go. And I had been his caretaker for 3 years, and I was like, "No, he's staying." And that was another thing throughout my journey of grieving him, was realizing that this wasn't all about me and my experience. And this book that I wrote was about me and my experience, but I make a point at the end to highlight he had his own story too. He had his life before. He had 42 years before I came into the world. That his life was chosen, written. He had his say in things too. And I trust that my mom knew that this was ready to, this was his time and it was ready to go. And that's just this circumstance. I know that there are people out there who have experienced death by tragedies that, that's a whole different type of grieving experience. But it's a beautiful thing, and it really helps you to come to peace with grief in a certain way when you can acknowledge that this was on their terms, and it might have
Yeah.
been their choice.
No, and you're right. I mean, yeah, every situation is different, which is why it is complicated, right? But so much of it is about the perspective and like, to your point, I love that you highlighted that you realize this actually isn't all about me. And yet it's normal as humans. We want to keep our pets alive because we love them and we want them for us. Am I considering what kind of pain she might be in? We want to keep our people alive because we love them and we want them for us. Am I considering what kind of life they're living and how their quality of life, is impacted, or what that looks like, right? So yeah, I mean, it's a complicated story. And I think when you think about the magic, it's number one, the permission to give yourself to find the magic, to see the magic, or to create the magic. Because you got to do one of those three things. You either have to create it, you have to choose to see it, or you have to actively go out and look for it. And I think a lot of it is about giving yourself permission, because there could be a lot of guilt, there could be a lot of judgment, there's a lot of commentary, chirping, right? The judgment, the fear, all of the things that prevent us from moving forward, living our lives, and choosing to see things magically. And what, I share that story about Axel because I think that is the magic. And so many people will see it different, or not see that at all, or don't understand how I could see it that way. Cool. That's how I see it. And that's my truth.
Mm-hmm.
Before we officially sign off, number one, tell us the name of your book. Of course, we'll put all the information in the show notes, but tell us the name of the book and anything else that you want us to cover that we haven't already touched on.
Okay, well, the name of the book is The Alchemy of the Beast. I got it right here. It is up for pre-order on Amazon. It is up for pre-order on Amazon. Releases on December 21st. The first 1,000 books that are sold have it's a limited edition. It won't be printed quite like this again. So the first 1,000 books that are sold have a sweet little surprise in there. And anything that is sold on launch day, all of the extra proceeds will be matched and donated to the Dougie Center in Portland, Oregon, where they support children and families going through grief. So I'm really excited about that. It's the first of a series, and every book will follow Scarlett as she journeys through another tragedy of the human experience and learns how to alchemize it into something greater than herself and create some meaning in it. So if anyone's interested, you can find more information about it at lionheartcreations.org/chronicles, and it has everything there. Oh, and we also just launched an online store with some products because the book has all this. I found an artist in the UK that I worked with for the artwork. So it has some really beautiful artwork inside. Her name is Carly Ashton. She's incredible. And so we made a ton of really fun products. Here's one little sneak peek.
Beautiful.
So all of that's on the website.
I mean, Alyssa, I can't tell you how impressed I am for someone as young as you to have gone through what you've gone through and to have turned this into something truly beautiful and magical that I know is going to help a lot of people. So thank you for being you and doing this hard work and going on this journey and being willing to share it and be open with it and creating it in what I can't wait to get my hands on, which I know is going to be a fascinating story and read. that is going to live on as a legacy forever and ever. So your dad literally is going to live on forever. Thank you for coming on. And everybody, I know this was a big conversation, some heavy, hard stuff, but hopefully some light and magical stuff as well. And now you just get to go and be a better being.
Thank you for listening to the Be a Better Being podcast. Michelle and Sasha hope that what you heard today inspires you to embrace this journey of life with an open mind, a kind heart, and a willingness to learn and evolve. If you enjoyed the content, please help spread their message by subscribing, sharing, and leaving a 5-star review. If you have a show topic idea or would like to be a guest, please visit betterbeings.net and fill out a contact form. Until next time, go and be a better being.